Hey, welcome back. Um, Today, I wanted to say a couple things first. I don't think I'll be recording an introduction lecture, mostly because I don't feel like watching myself talk. But thank you to everyone who reached out to me regarding the death in my family. I appreciate all the emails and statements made to me in person. Um, I really do appreciate it. My father passed away last week after a long fight with dementia, and Um, certainly it's heartbreaking, but it's also a relief in ways too. It's been a struggle for us. This is too, but it's different. And it has screwed up my schedule somewhat. I apologize for that, but I really appreciate the sentiments that I've received from you all. Thank you. To get back on track this week, I want to talk about incorporating feedback or utilizing feedback. It's a different way of thinking about it. There are two primary, well, Yeah, you think of it really as there being two primary sources for feedback on your work. They're going to come from professors and TAs, official types, and then everyone else. The most important feedback you will get is from your professors. And because you'll be getting back your midterms with comments in the next little while, I expect if you haven't already, um, I figured I'd give you some insights that we've gathered in the program to on how to use those materials. That kind of feedback is more useful in law school, and I'll explain why today. Finally, I divided this up into two sections. First part's on feedback from professors. Second part is getting your uh, feedback from other sources. So, first, it was Halloween. I hope you all had lovely Halloweens and whatever else you celebrate. These are my kids, of course, Saoirse and Kieran, who are, I think you can tell, the Hulk and Batgirl. Uh, it was a good night for them. They got candy. It was grand. They're cute. Haha, here we go. Okay. Incorporating feedback is one of the chances that you have to really improve your writing, exam answer writing ability. Certainly, it's also true for other kinds of writing. You'll get feedback from TAs and professors on your LRW stuff, for example. In my upper level classes, such as law and neuroscience, I give extensive feedback on drafts of papers. And um, there's ways of using that I like to see and other professors also like to see. When you have professor feedback and when you don't have professor feedback, different circumstances, like I said. When you have professor feedback, you prepare, scan, reflect, read and clarify, and prioritize, and finally make a plan for improvement. This is almost like those classic things we all learned in middle school. Learned it as SQ3R, but it's really just a different way of rephrasing the concepts of incorporating feedback. If you don't have professor feedback, you can seek that feedback in one of two ways. Again, I split things often to remind myself to mention both things. The first thing to do if you want feedback and you haven't gotten professor feedback is to go to that professor. Here's a little pro tip inside information. Professors don't always have time to grade every work product that you give them because they are prepping for class. So there's 135 of you, something like that. It's a lot of paper to read and give feedback on. They aren't going to do that for everyone. They just can't. However, if a student goes to them and asks for particularized feedback, saying, "What about this question did I get wrong? Why did you score it like this?" Most professors will absolutely give you extensive feedback. I think all of them will, honestly. I don't like to speak for everyone, but everyone I know will give you extensive feedback. We are in the education biz. So, this is the kind of thing we like to give. We want to see you get better, and that's how you can do it. The second way of getting that feedback and seeking that feedback is from each other or model answers. That's what I'll talk about in the second half. Okay, let's talk about professor feedback and go through those steps, the 6 steps that I just highlighted in turn. It's always shocking. I randomly add transitions to slides to surprise myself when I'm presenting. It was the same as the last one, but it surprised me. Again, sorry. This is just what I do with transitions. It always happens. My wife is laughing at me. It is what it is. So the first thing that you want to do when you get professor feedback is to prepare. One of the worst things you can do, not the worst thing. Worst thing is probably walking in your professor's office and saying, "What the hell are you thinking?" That's the worst thing. Don't do that. But instead, walk into the professor's office remembering that professor feedback is a gift. And it's going to be the most relevant information that you receive on what your professor likes to see. And it accordingly provides you an opportunity to learn this information not only more thoroughly as a general legal point, but pedagogically it allows you to learn what your professor wants and how they want you to say it. Accordingly, every drop of wisdom that comes from their mouth is going to be useful. Remember, again, I'll say this along the way several times. You are not your writing. You are not law school. And, when you receive criticism of something within this context, it's not a criticism of you. It's a criticism of that expression which you employed and maybe reasoning that you employed. So don't take it personally. Don't get defensive. Ask more questions and have a plan when you go in to talk to your professor. Have a plan with specific questions. Just don't walk in. This is one of the things you shouldn't do. And say, "Hey, what about my exam? I don't understand." So that isn't a particularized enough question for the professor to give you helpful feedback. Ask, and have specific questions. Okay. Dog issue resolved. Here, we're back. 2. Scan. And by this, I mean read all of the comments. Not all of them are going to be equally as important. But so you'll have to identify what stands out. At the same time, sometimes you can get a better perspective on the professor's style when you look at the comments as a whole. Okay. After you scan through your answer and identify all of the comments from your professor, digest those comments, think about them, and at this time, what I suggest is reflecting on those suggestions. The benefit is that you get to really incorporate these comments, and it allows you to think through the issues for yourself before actually going in and asking questions of your professor. But the easiest way for me to do this is to put the paper away. Do something else, preferably active. Go to the gym, go for a walk, play Skyrim. That's what I do these days just to kill some time, honestly. I love Skyrim. But anyway, you think about the content of the feedback without it directly in front of you, without it dominating your thinking. Because sometimes you may react fairly emotionally when you first read comments. Take a little bit of time, get some space, do something else, and think about the content of the feedback. Perhaps not the exact phrasing. That could be the challenge for you. Point 4 is to read and clarify. Now, after you've scanned and thought about the documents and contemplated, read the comments again carefully. Characterize the comments into a couple of categories. Errors, comments on the law. I won't say errors because sometimes it's just a stylistic thing. But comments on the law, comments on the organization, and comments regarding a misreading or misunderstanding of the facts. And each of those has a value. The organization may be very professor specific, depending on exactly what they want to see, and I think the law less so than organization. But to understand, make sure that you understand each of these comments. And if it's helpful for you, if your professor says, for example, in a comment that your answer is too conclusory, you may not appreciate what that means in detail. But a way to easily tell is by reading an answer from a colleague where that answer, the professor liked the answer, and therefore you can get a handle on how your answer differs from that one. You can also compare your answer with a model answer. I'll go over that more in the second half of this lecture. Then prioritize. Order the comments from most to least important. And there could be different contexts, and different things can be more important or less important depending on the context. But generally, you can start with global improvements, which comments will be applicable to all essays in this class, and maybe all essays as you um, go through your other classes. Are those global improvements to things like IRAC format and organization, the thoroughness of the analysis, the lack of conclusory analysis, stating and presentation of counterarguments, those kinds of things? And then move on to the law. Did you miss issues within the question? Was it an issue spotting question or a multiple choice question where you just didn't see the appropriate issues? Did you misapply the rule? Do you have to improve your understanding of the rule, or did you include inapplicable rules and analyses? All of these can be easily resolved issues if you approach it appropriately. And by appropriate here, I mean heeding the feedback you get in this regard from your professor. Do you not agree with that feedback? Okay. Um, you probably will end up agreeing with that feedback because it is from the professor who'll be grading. But at the same time, it may take you a little while to get your head around that input from the professor. But, mailman's here. Are we going to have a dog explosion? Oh, the tension.
You've been doing so well so far.
Okay, we'll see. Okay, so you then finish with sentence level feedback. Oh, and the dogs were restrained. Everyone, yay.
I'm so proud.
We're all so proud. So, anyway, you go with sentence level feedback. Do you need to improve your writing mechanics? That may be the case, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's plenty of people who are willing to help, myself included, as well as other other places you can go. Of course, my transitions are always exciting. Finally, you make a plan. This is all great information to process and incorporate into your thinking. But how will you ensure that you improve? In other words, you won't make the same types of errors on your next essay. Do you have to differently approach your structure? Do you have to label or highlight essays? Do you have to review the law, test yourself using multiple choice questions? You can visit the Writing Center and visit your professor. If it doesn't include basic mechanics of writing, the Writing Center is a great place to go. If it's more issues of law, then TA's professors are a better place to go, or myself. I'm willing, of course, to read whatever you send me, and I'll be a little quicker than I have been in the past now. But these are all very valuable ways to improve your writing. And finally, the easiest way to improve your writing is by practicing. The more times you see these questions asked, the more times, the easier and more quickly you will develop a strategy for answering within the exam. So if you, as I've mentioned before, there's only so many ways to test contract formation. There's only so many ways to test breach or the parole evidence rule. Pick your favorite contract, tort, property, whatever. There's only so many ways of testing these basic concepts. And if you think through them, you can come up with a lot of them. And if you do practice questions, you're going to see 90% of the ways of asking these kinds of questions. Um, so, practice those questions and profit. You'll be in good shape if you do the practice with all of these steps in mind.